Hey guys, tonight we're heading deep into the quiet heart of ancient Persia, where the air is dry, the gardens are lush, and the water flows without a sound. You're gonna love this one, especially if you've ever tried tiptoeing through your own backyard without waking the neighborhood birds. There's something magical about Persian gardens, not just their beauty, but how ingeniously they were made. Tonight, you're going to wander through one under the moonlight. You'll see how water moved through these green sanctuaries not with noisy pumps or clunky pipes, but with a centuries-old secret that's softer than a whisper. Seriously, if silence were an Olympic sport, these gardeners would have won gold. Twice. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your city and what time you're listening down in the comments. I'm always curious who else is awake with me under the stars. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin your stroll beside a stone wall still warm from the afternoon sun. Around you, the scent of jasmine drifts lazily, mingling with the faint coolness rising from the earth. The gravel under your feet doesn't crunch, it sighs. Everything about this place is designed to be gentle, deliberate, and that includes the water. You notice something odd. You hear nothing. No babbling fountains, no trickling streams. Yet, as you pass under an arch of pomegranate trees, you spot it. A narrow channel of water snaking through the garden like a vein of moonlight. But how? Where's it coming from? Why isn't it making a sound? The answer lies underground, literally. You're standing above one of Persia's greatest inventions, the Qanat system. Invented around 1000 BCE, give or take a dynasty, Qanats were underground tunnels that carried water from distant mountains to thirsty cities and gardens. Think of it as ancient air conditioning, but for plants. Here's the weird part. These tunnels were dug by hand, often stretching for miles beneath the desert. Workers, called mukanis, descended vertical shafts to dig sideways toward distant aquifers. Imagine doing all that with no GPS, no headlamp, and a serious fear of sand collapsing on your head. Oh, and a rope made of goat hair. Very on brand. Even today, historians argue over just how these early engineers managed such precision. Some think they used star maps. Others believe they followed the flight of birds or the instincts of wild animals. Still others mutter something about divine inspiration and shrug. But what's not up for debate is the genius of the system. Because the tunnels ran underground, the water stayed cool and didn't evaporate under the brutal sun. And best of all, gravity did all the work. No shouting, no clanging buckets, just a silent river beneath your feet. You pause beside a marble bench carved with faded calligraphy. It probably once sang poetry to the roses. A few sparrows sleep in the cypress branches overhead, their tiny bodies puffed up in dreams. You smile, knowing that the water, hidden, humble, holy, is flowing just beneath them, unheard, unseen, undisturbing. It's a kind of spiritual engineering, one that understood that beauty isn't always loud, that refreshment doesn't need applause, and that waking up a bird at 2 a.m. should be a crime punishable by cactus. Of course, the real artistry was how gardeners controlled that water, channeling it into shallow rills that snaked between beds of herbs and flowers, creating just enough moisture for the soil to whisper thank you. No hoses, no sprinklers, just centuries of trial, error, and the occasional goat-related mishap. And yes, goats did fall into Qanat shafts, often, which is why many were later sealed with decorative stone covers or clay lids. Functional and stylish, Persian engineering didn't come to play. You walk on, the breeze tugging gently at your sleeve. Somewhere behind you, a nightjar calls. Not startled, just stating its existence. Even the birds here seem to know they're living in a masterpiece. You step deeper into the garden, your sandals brushing the edge of a tiled pathway glazed in faded blues and greens, cool underfoot, even in the hush of night. The sky above is vast, a deep indigo dome pierced by stars, and the scent of wet earth grows stronger. You follow it. It's not a trickle that guides you, it's the feel of moisture clinging to the air, like a secret whispered through stone. Down a shallow slope, you reach a rectangular pool, perfectly still. Moonlight lies on its surface like silk. No pump, no bubbling jets, just peace. You crouch by the edge, noticing how the water barely laps at the carved lip of the basin. This was no accident. Persian gardeners believed that still water reflected the heavens, and heaven had to be clear, unbroken, serene. Splashing would only spoil the mirror, so they built for silence, for stillness, and, perhaps unintentionally, for sleep. Tonight, the garden feels like it's breathing with you, slow and even. Historically, these gardens weren't just fancy backyards. They were called paradesa, walled enclosures. Yes, that word should sound familiar. It's where we get paradise. So when you hear that ancient Persian kings built paradise on earth, they meant it literally. Enclosed, fragrant, green, symmetrical, and blessedly quiet. The symmetry mattered. Each path, tree, and channel was designed in harmony, drawing the eye toward the center. The same way your thoughts drift now, not scattered, but gently herded inward. And speaking of channels, the qanats didn't just end here. The water had to be guided through a series of karis, shallow, open-air canals that laced through the garden like embroidery. Each was angled just so, allowing water to flow without splashing. Not too fast, not too slow, just right for roots and robins alike. Of course, maintaining such perfect calm required constant care. Gardeners had to clean out the narrow channels, remove silt, adjust flow, and appease the occasional sulking cat. Yes, cats. Persian gardens had them long before they became TikTok royalty. They roamed the hedges like emperors in fur pajamas, overseeing irrigation with aloof indifference. But here's where it gets strange. Some texts suggest that certain garden caretakers were trained to listen for the water. Not see, not measure, but listen. Because a slight change in the pitch or rhythm might signal a blockage or leak far underground. Imagine your job being a water whisperer. Hey Mahmoud, does that sound like a pebble in the fifth shaft? Nah, that's just spring melt echoing off the third bend. Even today, some scholars debate whether these water listeners were real specialists or just poetic exaggerations. But honestly, in a place like this, where everything feels tuned like a lullaby, it's not hard to believe. You pass under a wooden trellis now, its beams tangled with sleeping grapevines. A few tiny figs hang heavy in the dark. You resist the urge to reach up. This is a dream garden, no snacking allowed. Beyond the trellis, the path widens, revealing a pavilion lit by oil lamps that burn low and golden. The air here is thick with memory. You half expect a scribe to be sitting there, ink-stained, muttering about water taxes and moon calendars. That's not a joke. Water rights in ancient Persia were incredibly complex. Every landowner had a measured share of flow, tracked to the minute by clay tokens and sundials. One missed turn, and your neighbor might show up at your door with a frown and a cucumber. Diplomacy was crucial. And yet, for all its bureaucratic tedium, this system worked for over 2 millennia. The qanats watered not just gardens, but entire cities. Yazd, Ghanabad, Nishapur, places where rain was a rumor and shade a miracle. Even today, some of those same qanats are still in use. Still, it wasn't all harmony and rose petals. Historical records mention sabotage, one gardener flooding another's plot out of spite, or mysterious collapses just after harvest season. The sort of drama that makes you wonder if ancient irrigation guilds had their own version of reality TV. Keeping up with the Connaught keepers, perhaps? But not tonight. Tonight, the only drama is the gentle ripple of water catching starlight. You sit on a low stone ledge, toes nearly brushing the surface. The temperature here is perfect, cool but not cold, the kind of night that feels tucked in. A nightjar flutters past, silent. You lean back, letting your shoulders relax into the embrace of ancient design.
A breeze drifts through the cypress trees now, slow and tentative, as if not to wake the stones. You walk again, past a row of clay pots lined along the wall, some cracked, some greened by age. They were likely used to cool water or store herbs. The Persians, as you're starting to realize, didn't just shape water, they listened to it. They let it speak. And in a way, it still does. The next corner of the garden reveals a narrow aqueduct bordered by wild mint. The scent is strong, refreshing. It strikes you how intentional that is. Mint near water. Not just for aesthetics, but for the way its aroma cools the air. Practical, sensual, almost sacred. You reach down and trail your fingers along the surface. Still no splash, still no ripple. It's as if the water knows it's being watched, or perhaps it simply respects the quiet. Historically, this kind of subtle engineering wasn't only for beauty, it was survival. These gardens were constructed in arid lands, where rainfall was an annual guest and summer hung around like an unwanted in-law. A well-fed garden meant life, a dry one meant migration, or worse. But here's where the genius deepens. These Connaught-fed gardens didn't rely on brute force. No pumps, no dams, no clanging wheels. Just gravity, geometry, and centuries of whispered know-how passed from father to son, master to apprentice. Take, for example, the air well. It sounds futuristic, but it's not. Some Persian pavilions had towers designed to cool hot air naturally, funneling it over water channels hidden beneath the floors. As air passed through, it cooled and sank. Passive refrigeration, like a fridge with a beard. You pause beside one of these towers now. It looms above the trees, simple yet profound. You'd never guess it was a piece of climate control, just another mud brick structure in a sleeping garden. But down below, cool air glides past your ankles, threading between tiles and olive roots. And right there, do you hear it? A soft tap-tap. A water drop from above, sliding through a funnel cut in stone, falling into a ceramic basin below. It sounds accidental, but of course it's not. The droplet lands at intervals so regular it feels like a heartbeat. Another way to measure time, another way to dream. Now, here's a strange historical detail. Some medieval Persian texts claim that these gardens were tuned, not metaphorically, tuned as in acoustically engineered to amplify or mute specific sounds. According to one particularly poetic source, the channels near the orange groves sing with summer, while the fig groves hush the winter wind. Sounds dramatic, right? But recent studies on certain garden layouts reveal odd resonance zones, spots where footsteps vanish into silence or where whispers carry farther than they should. Coincidence? Maybe, but you're standing in one now, and when you shuffle your feet, the sound simply disappears. It's one of those academic debates still circling. Were Persian gardens deliberately designed for sound, or is that just a happy accident born of stone and symmetry? You keep walking. A pair of lanterns now flank a low doorway. You duck inside and find yourself in a tea alcove, a room half exposed to the garden with cushions lining the floor. The scent here is stronger: rosewater, dried lime, maybe even saffron if your imagination's feeling extra. You lie back on a cushion. From here, you can see the reflection of stars in the water beyond the doorway. They wobble slightly, like they're breathing. It's easy to forget, amid all this serenity, that these gardens weren't just for resting. They were statements. Power, taste, control. A king's garden could be hundreds of meters long, with entire teams of horticulturists, astrologers, and water watchers. Some even believed certain flowers bloomed better under particular planetary alignments. It's like the astrology section of a gardening magazine, but, with more Persian calligraphy and fewer ads for weed killer. A scribe's journal from the 14th century describes a melon whisperer, a man who sang to vines and claimed he could sweeten the fruit with recited verses. Was he a horticultural genius or just high on rosewater fumes? Historians remain divided. But tonight, as the breeze hums and the stars shift, you almost believe it. Your eyes grow heavier, not from boredom, but from the way this place cradles the senses. The silence isn't empty, it's full of memory, of footsteps on packed clay, of sandals carried in the crook of an arm, of a gardener wiping sweat with a
The path you follow now feels older. The stones beneath your sandals are uneven, rubbed smooth in places, sharp in others, as if time had chosen which memories to soften and which to keep jagged. You pass under a low wooden arch, vines coiling above your head like lazy scribbles of green ink. Somewhere to your right, a nightingale lets out a quick trill, then falls silent again. It's getting deeper, not just in terms of space, but in atmosphere. The garden is narrowing, like it's ushering you toward a secret. You half expect a door to appear in the trunk of an old tree, or for a squirrel in a tiny turban to ask for a password. Instead, what you find is a sunken courtyard, barely noticeable until you're almost on top of it. 4 steps down, walled in on all sides by patterned brick. In the center, a square pool, still, not a single ripple. The moon hangs above it perfectly, its reflection sharp as a coin. You stand at the edge, and again you're struck by how deliberate it all is. The steps, the silence, the scent of jasmine drifting in with the breeze, it feels less like design and more like intention, as though this entire space was arranged for you to pause. Historically, these pools weren't just aesthetic, they served practical purposes too, cooling the surrounding air, reflecting sunlight to light-shaded areas, even functioning as emergency fire breaks. And yet, when the air is this still, you suspect they were also meant for one other thing: meditation. Or perhaps more precisely, immersion. Not physical, but mental. These gardens weren't built to show off wealth alone. They were sanctuaries, retreats for poets, scholars, mystics, men who debated the nature of the soul while pruning pomegranate trees, who paused mid-verse because a bee landed on the ink bottle. And here's a curious tidbit. Some scholars suggest Persian garden layouts mirrored the Sufi concept of the self. 4 quadrants representing different aspects of the human soul: desire, reason, spirit, and memory. The central water source, the divine. Everything flowing toward and from it. You dip your fingers into the water. Cold. Colder than you expect. Maybe it's the depth, or maybe this part of the garden lies directly above one of the older qanat shafts. Either way, it's bracing, like a whispered reminder that under all this tranquility runs something ancient and unseen. A rustle behind you. You glance back. Just a cat, striped and lean, trotting silently across the stone ledge. It doesn't spare you a glance. Persian cats weren't bred to lounge on royal pillows, you realize. They evolved to haunt spaces like this, silent guardians of the night. And speaking of night, how did they keep these places lit without disturbing the hush? Turns out they often used light wells, small, strategically placed mirrors or polished metal plates to bounce candlelight across pathways and corners. Imagine walking these gardens with only the shimmer of flickered gold to guide you. You'd see more shadows than shapes, more outlines than edges. It's romantic, it's haunting. It's also a fire hazard, but hey, details. You ascend the steps on the opposite side of the courtyard and find yourself beside a wall of latticework. Wooden panels carved in overlapping stars. Light filters through in soft hexagons, splashing across the path like broken honeycomb. You trace one of the shapes with your finger. It hums faintly under your touch, not literally, but you feel it anyway. Geometric design was a form of worship after all, a way of touching infinity without offending it. Symmetry wasn't just pretty, it was divine logic made visible. A reminder that in a chaotic world, there could still be order, purpose, peace. And maybe that's why these gardens lasted. Through empire and collapse, drought and conquest, the gardens remained. Not always intact, but always reborn. Someone always came back, with a shovel, with a prayer, with a handful of seeds, and the memory of where the water ran. Because unlike palaces or statues, gardens live. They die too, sure, but they can come back. Their memory written in roots. You can burn a scroll, you can smash a vase, but if someone remembers how the channels curved, how the pomegranate split open at summer's height, then the garden still breathes. You pass another fig tree now. Low branches, heavy fruit. In some traditions, fig trees were seen as places of revelation, solitude, even temptation. Depending on how dramatic your mood is tonight, you can choose any of the three. A bit farther along, the path splits again. One way curves back toward your foot touches the damp stone, and the garden changes. Gone are the polite rows of citrus and manicured hedges. Here, the plants grow wilder, less pruned, more whispering. Cypress trees stand like sentinels on either side, their trunks rising in unwavering silence. Their scent is sharper now, almost medicinal. Beneath them, ferns tremble with each shift in the breeze, though there doesn't seem to be any wind at all. The path narrows, not so much carved as surrendered to over time. You duck under a crooked arch of grapevine, yes, real grapes, dangling heavy and sweet-smelling, as if no one told them the hour is far too late for ripening. Some things bloom when they please. Your sandals scuff against an uneven edge, and for a moment you feel like a trespasser. This part of the garden wasn't designed for guests. It's too honest, too uncurated. It smells like age and root rot, like old water and patient things. And there it is. Tucked behind a veil of creeping ivy, a rusted door, arched and half swallowed by the garden's memory. You don't open it, not yet. Just knowing it's there makes the moment feel deeper, like the garden is layered and you've only just reached the threshold of something sacred. You remember hearing a theory, probably on a podcast you barely stayed awake for, that Persian gardeners often included hidden doors in their designs. They didn't always lead somewhere. Sometimes they were metaphor, an idea, the possibility of elsewhere, a way to remind the soul that it too had doors. And while we're on theories, did you know some archaeologists argue that these overgrown zones were intentional? That the wild sections of a garden represented mystery or even the afterlife? A symbolic transition from the orderly realm of man into the unknowable domain of the divine. The birds are quieter here. Not silent, just fewer. Perhaps they know this corner belongs to something older than chirping, something that listens more than it speaks. And yet, a sound rises. Water again, but not the pleasant trickle of fountains. This is more primal, deeper. A slow, steady gulp, like something vast drinking beneath your feet. It's the qanat. You crouch, placing your palm on the stone floor. It hums faintly. Not vibration exactly, more like presence. You realize the entire garden has been balanced on this unseen lifeline. An ancient water system dug by hands long dust, still threading life beneath the surface. Historical fact, the oldest known qanats date back over 2,700 years. Built in Iran, they carried water from mountain aquifers to the plains below. Entire civilizations bloomed along their routes. And unlike open canals, they minimized evaporation. Pure genius in a desert climate. It's like the gardeners whispered, "Let's water the world, but not wake it." Which brings you to a delicious thought. They chose not to wake the birds. Imagine the level of peace a system must operate at. Not just functional, but gentle. No motors, no pumps. Just gravity, slope, and silence. The garden above owes its hush to the engineering marvel sleeping below. If poetry could dig, it would have made qanats. And now, a weird little aside. In some regions, people believed spirits guarded these underground tunnels. Some even claimed to hear voices echoing up through the shafts. Not terrifying voices, mind you, just watchful, like the earth gently clearing its throat. Do spirits have municipal plumbing responsibilities? Hard to say. But if they do, Persian spirits clearly read the design manuals. You wander a bit farther and spot something unexpected. A small bench, carved from stone, half covered in moss, perfectly placed to face nothing in particular. Which, of course, is exactly what makes it perfect. You sit, not because you're tired, but because something inside you says, this is where you listen. You lean back. Above, the trees sway in slow rhythm. Behind you, that hidden door keeps its secrets. And somewhere deep underfoot, the qanat breathes. The sound isn't loud, but you start to hear it layered with your own breath, like your lungs are syncing to the garden's pulse. And perhaps they are. There's something humbling about sitting in a space designed to outlive you. Not in a threatening way, more in the manner of a grandmother who knows your favorite tea before you ask. These gardens were built to teach patience. The trees don't rush, the water doesn't chase.
You step forward, and the air cools, brushing against your arms like the breath of a place that has just woken from a centuries-long nap. But this part of the garden isn't groggy, it's alert, alive in that quietly observant way of old monks and deeply suspicious cats. Your eyes adjust to the dim. The path here is less defined, more suggestion than structure. The stones beneath your feet have shifted with time, leaning into the soil like tired pilgrims. You tread carefully, though not out of fear, out of respect. This place demands gentleness, like walking across a beloved memory. To your left, an almond tree leans heavily into the path, its trunk twisted in that ancient posture that only comes from standing in one spot too long. You reach up, touch a low-hanging leaf. It's soft, almost dusty, like it's been saving its story just for your fingertips. And then, like a surprise that pretends it wasn't waiting for you, there it is. A shallow pool, round as the moon, cradled in pale limestone. Its surface is unnaturally still. Not a ripple, not a shiver. The kind of stillness that makes you question your own breath. Above it, a lattice of wooden beams, half covered in vines, casts a broken shadow across the water. It looks like a sundial lost track of time. You kneel beside it, fingers hovering just above the surface. You don't touch it yet. You're not sure if you're allowed. There's something uncanny about still water, isn't there? It reflects perfectly, but never tells the whole truth. Some philosophers believed water had memory, that it could hold on to emotion, that it could feel. You wonder what stories this pool might know, who it has reflected, who it has forgotten. One story comes to mind. Historical fact: Persian gardens often featured a central pool, not only for aesthetics, but for function. These pools were cooling agents, collecting water from the underground qanats, allowing it to gently evaporate and chill the air around them. The garden became its own climate system, eco-engineering before the term even existed. Even more fascinating, in the heat of summer, the water in these pools could stay cool thanks to a principle called the stack effect. Cold air sinks, hot air rises. The qanats below created a gentle draft, pulling warmth away and leaving behind a hush of coolness. The garden didn't just refresh, it healed. But here's something a little stranger.
In some old Persian texts, the central pool was seen as a mirror of the soul. Gardeners were instructed to place it in such a way that it reflected the sky at noon and the stars at night. It was more than a water feature. It was a window into heaven, a private cosmos tucked between the jasmine and the mint. You look up. The sky tonight is unusually clear, a soft spatter of stars, some lazy clouds drifting like half-formed dreams. And yes, you see it, the stars reflected perfectly in the pool. You smile, because even if no one else saw it tonight, the water did. You finally let your fingers dip in. It's cooler than you expect, but not cold, just knowing. Like shaking hands with someone who has lived several lifetimes, but still chooses kindness. There's a low hum, almost imperceptible. At first, you think it's just in your ears, garden tinnitus. But no, it's real. It's coming from the pool. A soft resonance, like a bowl being played by invisible hands. And just then, a bird. A single nightingale. You don't see it, but you hear its note, sharp, clear, unbothered. You pause. The stillness of the water, the song of the night, the idea that somehow all this was designed for moments like this. You shift your gaze and notice another feature, a narrow channel extending from the pool, barely an inch deep, carved straight into the stone. It snakes away like a quiet rivulet, disappearing beneath a bed of reeds. A mini aqueduct, ancient and whisper-thin. It reminds you of something from childhood. Remember those little marble racetracks you used to build with rain gutters and your dad's garden hose? How you'd send tiny boats downstream and pretend they were on great voyages. Yeah, this is the grown-up version, but somehow even more magical. Academics still argue over whether these channels were purely functional or ceremonial. Some say they were for irrigation. Others believe they symbolize the rivers of paradise, guiding the soul through its earthly journey. And still others, they say it's both. That in Persian design, function was never.
The path now narrows, drawing you in like a secret whispered from one leaf to another. You feel the pull, not urgent, not forceful, but steady, like gravity, but softer. The garden no longer feels like a place you're walking through. It feels like a story that's decided you belong in it. Ahead, the ground dips, and your steps lead you down a slight decline into what feels like a hidden basin, a hollow carved deliberately out of the earth's breath. The air grows warmer here, heavier with the scent of ripe figs and damp earth. Somewhere nearby, water trickles lazily. It doesn't rush, it lounges. You pause, not from exhaustion, but out of reverence. This part of the garden feels older. Not in the way trees feel old, but in the way ruins remember. It's as though this hollow has held generations of silence, folded gently beneath each leaf that fell, each breeze that passed through. You kneel instinctively, and your fingers brush against an oddly shaped stone, worn smooth, as if hundreds of hands had once touched it with the same kind of curious care. And suddenly, you're not alone. No, don't worry, it's not a ghost. It's something stranger. A donkey. Well, sort of. Standing about 30 feet away is the most unbothered animal you've ever seen. It's not tied up, not fenced in, and yet, somehow, you know it belongs here. Its coat is dusty gray, and its ears twitch lazily, as if swatting away some invisible insult. You try not to laugh, but then it snorts, loudly, like it's judging your shoes. The donkey just stares, and then, unprompted, it starts walking, not toward you, just off, into the next bend of the garden, but with a pace so deliberate, so particular, that you can't help but follow. This isn't the first time a donkey has led someone to revelation, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. Historical detail. In many Persian estates, animals like donkeys were used to assist with water-drawing mechanisms.
One particularly clever design, called a sakya, used a rotating wheel system powered by a donkey to pull water from underground reserves. The donkey, walking in gentle circles all day, powered the garden's veins, its streams and channels. It wasn't just labor, it was choreography. And here's the curious part. Some ancient Persian poems personify the donkey, not mockingly but lovingly, as the garden's keeper of rhythm. Its pace measured the hours, its breathing matched the swing of the ropes and buckets. In certain villages, children were taught to listen for the creak of the water wheel and the plod of hooves like a lullaby. If the donkey is quiet, a saying went, then the garden sleeps. You smile, wondering if this particular donkey is retired or just on break. Maybe it's unionized. Maybe it's simply here for emotional support. You wouldn't put it past Persian design to include a morale officer with 4 legs and an attitude. The donkey disappears behind a thicket of lavender and pomegranate, and you're left again with the quiet. But it isn't empty. The air is thick with echoes, not of sound, but of rhythm. You feel it under your skin. That ancient heartbeat of labor and water, of loops and circles and time drawn by hooves. Then, almost imperceptibly, you spot them, wheel tracks, faint, worn into the stone over centuries. The lazy spiral of some long-gone sakya. You trace one arc with your toe, following its curve until it leads you to something unexpected. A well. It's shallow now, mostly filled with stones and leaves, but the shape is unmistakable. Round, wide-lipped, and lined with pale tiles that catch the moonlight like a forgotten smile. You lean in, half expecting to hear a whisper. Instead, a small gust of wind spirals up from its center, cool and deliberate. You whisper into it, just for fun. Something nonsensical, maybe your name, maybe a line from a song you don't fully remember. The well doesn't echo, it listens. Scholars debate whether these wells were entirely functional or partly symbolic. Some argue that even in their practical use, they were intended to mirror the divine, an invitation to look downward and still see the sky. Others suggest they were meant to teach patience. After all, water drawn by hand or hoof is slow, and slowness, in a desert, is power. There's a lesson there, probably one you'll forget by morning, but for now, you let it settle in your chest. And speaking of lessons, remember how as a kid you once tried to build your own well in the backyard? You dug about 2 feet down before hitting something your sister claimed was definitely cursed. You both screamed. It was a rock.
The garden breathes differently now. You notice it as soon as you rise, how the wind changes direction just slightly, brushing your cheek like a whisper with secrets it won't repeat. The donkey, satisfied with its cameo, has vanished again, no doubt off to report your progress to some mystical garden council made entirely of sleepy animals and old clay pots. You step past the well and back onto a path that barely seems like a path at all, just the memory of footsteps, like someone walked this way long ago and left only a suggestion for you to follow. The stones here are older, sunken deep into the earth like tired shoulders. Their edges are worn, their shapes uneven, and yet they guide you more surely than a signpost ever could. Your hands brush against rosemary bushes, fragrant and unruly. Somewhere nearby, a bee hums, not industrious, but lazy, as if drunk on sunlight and nectar. The scent here is potent, crushed herbs, warm stone, and something else, something almost metallic. You pause, inhale deeply, and it comes to you. Iron, the kind used in old tools, rusted shovels, ancient chains. And then you see it. An open chamber, half submerged into the hillside, with its entrance framed by date palms. It isn't dramatic, no ornate gate, no carved inscription, just a simple archway of brick, faded to the color of ash and honey. You duck inside, and the temperature drops a full 10 degrees. The stone floor is cool beneath your steps, and your breath echoes softly, like even sound treads carefully here. You're in the heart of the Qanat. Let's pause here for our historical fact. The Qanat was an ingenious system used in ancient Persia to channel underground water across vast distances using only gravity. Unlike surface canals, it minimized evaporation and required no modern technology. Builders would dig a series of vertical shafts, like manholes, connected by a gently sloping tunnel. Water, drawn from a higher elevation aquifer, would flow effortlessly toward its destination: the gardens, the homes, the cities. But here's the kicker. These systems weren't built overnight. Some Qanats took decades to complete, passed from father to son, with engineers using plumb lines, the stars, and a shocking amount of patience. In Yazd, one such Qanat still functions today, over 2,000 years since it was first dug. And here, in this quiet chamber, you see part of what made it possible. A slanted tunnel disappears into darkness, its ceiling so low you'd have to crawl. Along one wall, niches carved to hold oil lamps, still blackened with soot. The air smells like old clay and mineral-rich water. Somewhere far below, you hear the distant trickle of movement, faint but steady, like a promise. Academic debates abound about who exactly invented the Qanat system. While Persia is credited with perfecting it, similar techniques have been found in Egypt, Morocco, even China. Some argue it was a shared knowledge passed through migrating peoples. Others suggest divine inspiration, or at least the sort of divine boredom that turns into problem-solving when you have enough desert and not enough rain. And now here you are, standing inside the very idea of persistence. You run your fingers along the grooves in the wall, finger width but smooth from years of repetition. A worker's rhythm, perhaps. Swipe, chip, breathe, swipe, chip, rest. You imagine the silence they labored in, interrupted only by the creak of rope, the scrape of stone. No Spotify playlist, just sweat and sand and an understanding that what you build might never be seen, but it would feed the roots of pomegranates long after your bones had turned to dust. Suddenly, you remember something odd from a documentary you once half-watched while sick on the couch. Some of the Qanat tunnels were said to sing. No, really. When the wind struck them just right, it would whistle through the vertical shafts like a pan flute made by the earth. Travelers swore it sounded like a prayer. Skeptics claimed it was coincidence, but the romantic in you hopes it was the engineer's secret, a way to remind the world that even water can hum if you teach it the notes. You sit on a stone bench, barely wider than your thigh, and look out through the entrance. The garden seems far away now, like a dream you've just woken from. In here, time has condensed, thickened. It no longer passes by, it swirls gently around you, waiting. And still, the water moves. It always has. You realize suddenly that you haven't spoken in hours, not a single word. Your steps are slower now, not because of fatigue, but because something in you has shifted, like silt settling at the bottom of a long-forgotten stream. The silence of the Qanat still clings to your skin, and even the breeze seems reluctant to interrupt. You're more aware of the garden's sounds again, a lizard scurrying behind a warm stone, the groan of a fig tree stretching toward the sun, and that odd, wet sigh of the soil breathing in water it didn't expect. You follow a path marked not by walls or tiles, but by the pattern of shadows. The trees cast long fingers across the ground, gently herding you toward what you can only describe as a clearing, but not the open kind. This one is intimate, almost secret, enclosed by rows of cypress and myrtle. In the center, a large stone basin, its edge worn into soft curves from centuries of elbows, wet cloths, and quiet rituals. A single steady stream of water spills into the basin from a spout carved like a lion's head. You lean close. The water is so clear it looks like liquid glass, so quiet it almost defies physics. And now we pause for a delightful historical oddity.
Some ancient Persian gardens used water as more than hydration. They used it as music. In the most refined gardens, channels were carved with slight ridges or small stones precisely placed to create melodic gurgling, like a xylophone for water. They called these features murmuring streams, a soundtrack not just for beauty, but for peace of mind. Imagine never needing a meditation app again, just a garden engineered to soothe your soul with its own whisper. You dip your hands in the basin. The water is cool and impossibly still. For a moment, it reflects your face so clearly that you nearly flinch, not because of vanity, but because of what else you see behind you. There's someone there. You whirl around, and of course, there's no one. Just the swaying of olive branches and the vague suspicion that you're being watched, not with menace, but with curiosity. The kind of presence that doesn't breathe or speak, but attends. A silent observer woven into the very roots of this place. And suddenly, you remember the ghost gardener. It's one of those tales whispered among the oldest caretakers of Persian gardens, that in every truly ancient garden, there remains a single invisible figure who never left. Not a haunting exactly, more like devotion fossilized, a presence that prunes the roses at night, that shifts stones before they crack, that gently closes the water gates just before a flood. Skeptical? Sure. But so were the 19th century European botanists who tried to recreate Persian irrigation systems in Spain, only to fail repeatedly until they began hiring the descendants of the original gardeners. The techniques, it turned out, weren't all in the diagrams. They lived in the fingertips. Which brings us to a juicy academic debate. Can a garden remember? Some historians argue that a well-maintained Persian garden learns over centuries. Its soil, shaped by hands and time, adapts. Others claim it's nonsense, romanticism dressed as science. But then you see a branch lean just a bit toward the path as you walk by, and you wonder, maybe it's not that the garden remembers, but that it recognizes. You move around the basin, now aware of the subtle slopes beneath your feet. Nothing here is flat. Everything nudges the water gently towards something else. To the right, a tiny carved trough, only a few inches wide. You crouch to follow it with your eyes and find it leads to a shallow channel that loops like a question mark around a bed of tulips. The water flows lazily, like it has nowhere to be, yet everywhere to go. And you feel protective of it, like you want to shield it from the world. The water here isn't just liquid, it's memory. You sit at the edge of the basin, close enough for your knees to touch the cool stone. Your fingers trail through the water, and you imagine the generations before you doing the same. Farmers, nobles, scholars, children, maybe even an emperor or two. All of them pressing into this moment without realizing it. All of them leaving behind echoes. You lean back, letting the sun warm your face, and remember a ridiculous fact. Some early Qanat engineers used goat bladders as measuring devices for slope and flow. That's right, goat bladders. The past is nothing if not resourceful and slightly gross. Above you, a cloud drifts past the sun, casting a fleeting shadow that makes the whole garden seem to exhale. The air cools briefly, and with it a strange sense of expectancy, as if the garden knows you're close to something important. And then it happens. A nightingale begins to...
The path becomes deliberate now. Not just a stroll, but a procession. Slow, reverent, as if the very stones under your feet are guiding you towards something sacred. The air is sweeter here. Faint hints of citrus and warm stone mingle with something more elusive, a trace of rosewater maybe, or memory. You step past the cypress line, and the garden opens into a quiet courtyard, perfectly square, as if drawn by a ruler held by someone who dreams in silence. In the center, a wide reflecting pool mirrors the sky above, an uninterrupted pane of glass that makes you pause. For a moment, it's hard to tell whether you're looking up or down, whether you're standing on the earth or tiptoeing across the heavens. This is the final chamber,
the heart of the garden. Every path, every shadow, every drop of water has led to this one space. And here's where the most subtle trick of Persian gardening reveals itself. It isn't just about controlling nature, it's about mirroring paradise. Yes, historians and theologians alike point out that traditional Persian gardens were modeled on descriptions of heaven in the Quran and pre-Islamic Persian texts. 4 quadrants, flowing water, fragrant shade, a central pool reflecting eternity. Paradise wasn't just promised, it was planted. But here's the wrinkle that scholars still wrestle with. Were these gardens just metaphors? Or were they invitations, literal blueprints for what heaven might feel like, smell like, sound like? Some even argue that tending these spaces was a form of worship, that the act of guiding water and planting trees was more sacred than kneeling in prayer. And so you stand, one person between earth and sky, staring down at your own reflection, framed by clouds that look like they've been painted for your benefit alone. Then, from somewhere, maybe from inside the pool, maybe from the folds of your imagination, you hear a voice. Not a sentence, not a language, just a tone. Gentle, low, like the hum of a mother's lullaby sung decades before you were born. You close your eyes, and something astonishing happens. You see everything. A flicker of the first shovel cutting into sun-baked soil, the rush of water breaking through stone, the hands of nameless gardeners planting jasmine by moonlight, the quiet rebellion of a tulip blooming where it wasn't told to, a child's laugh echoing between trees, the slap of bare feet on warm tiles, and the uncountable, gentle weight of time folding itself into petals and pathways and every tiny decision that brought this garden into being. You're crying now, just a little, silently, not out of sorrow, but because you realize, finally, that this place is alive. Not in the way you and I are, with cells and skin and expiration dates, but in a slower, deeper way. The garden remembers. It holds the intentions of everyone who ever touched it. The dreams, the failures, the hopes whispered into palms before seeds were sown. And for some reason, it has accepted you. You sit at the pool's edge, cross-legged like a student waiting for a story. The surface of the water barely moves, but underneath, life is everywhere. Tiny bugs skitter. A single goldfish glides by, like punctuation at the end of a sentence written by wind. Oh, and here's your final weird historical tidbit of the evening. In some Persian gardens, fish weren't just decorative. They were used to gauge water purity. A healthy fish, good garden. Dead fish, back to the qanat you go. Brutal, yes, but effective. You can't argue with the logic of fish-based plumbing diagnostics. A shadow passes over you. Not a cloud, not a tree, but the return of that feeling, being watched, attended to. You don't turn around this time. You don't need to. Somewhere, the ghost gardener is nodding. You lie back now, slowly, your head resting on warm stone. Above you, the sky is pinking, just a little, the edge of twilight. Somewhere far off, another bird sings. Not a nightingale this time, but something simpler, more content. You take a deep breath, the kind that feels final but isn't, the kind that says, you've seen enough for one night. And as you let your eyes close, the image of the garden lingers, not just as a place, but as a feeling. Cool water, soft tile, hidden paths, and a silence that doesn't ask you to fill it. You are held, you are remembered, you are forgiven. And now, as the garden fades behind your eyelids, let yourself drift deeper into that velvet quiet.